All right. Welcome, everybody. Hugo Bowne-Anderson here, host of the Data ML AI podcast, Vanishing Gradients. I am so excited to be here today with Ravin Kumar. What's up, Ravin?
Hey, not much, Hugo. You got me up talking about all the things you're going to ask me about, so I'm all here
Look, I'm
for.
so excited. And so you're currently in Los Angeles,
I am currently in technically Orange County.
in Orange County. My
Yes,
bad. South
you're all
California. I
good.
was close. Um, I got my telescope out from the other side of the country. I'm currently in Brooklyn, New York, BK all day. For people who are joining, introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you are and what your interest in such things is. And also, if you've got any questions or things you'd like me to ask Raven, just drop them in the chat and we'll do our best to get to them. Um, I Look, I'm so excited for this chat, as you know, Raven, for a number of reasons. Oh yeah, also. Sorry, the obligatory. If you enjoy this, please share with friends and colleagues and like and subscribe and all of
Please.
those wonderful things. Um, but you're now at Google Labs doing a lot of research into, foundation models and the products that we can build for them and I from them. And I want to get to all of this, but you've had such a fascinating journey to where you are now, and it ain't over yet. But from Tesla, SpaceX to Sweetgreen to probabilistic programming with PyMC. So I'm just wondering if you can give us kind of a brief introduction to what you've done historically and how they've led you to your current position at Google.
Yeah, I think as you pointed out, I think I'm been lucky to have worked at in a number of teams that are pushing the frontier for various things, whether that be rockets or in this case now, frontier AI. Uh, just for me, I mean, going way back as a kid, it just fascinated me so much how you could use mathematics to just describe the things around you. I remember being in high school and you learning about Newtonian mechanics, and it just, explained how things fall and how momentum worked. And I was like, oh wow, you can actually describe all these phenomena with with equations. And if you really scale it up, you can then describe how planes fly, how bridges are built, how buildings don't collapse, like so many things. So I got my degree in mechanical engineering, and that led me into SpaceX and the hard mechanics industry where we're building rockets. Actually, just like the Starship launch that happened two days ago. Like for me, early days on that project in 2017. But when I was at SpaceX, I realized I also wanted to describe the things that were more intangible. I was in the department at SpaceX that was figuring out how to build the rocket, the supply chain department. So not necessarily the one that was figuring out how the rocket flew, but the one that was like, how do all these pieces come together? When you see something like Starship, there are literally tens of millions of parts that have to come together to get that rocket to fly that one time. It's like little bolts, little washers, uh, just sealant, O-rings. They come into these bigger structures and bigger structures into bigger structures. Um, and you can describe this whole thing as as a graph in computer technology, and you can describe the way pieces get to each other as edges. So now you have this sort of bill of materials, just like a Lego. And I realized, what would be really cool is generative modeling would be neat to explain the variation in how these things get built. That's how I got into PyMC. Uh, oh, and Hugo.
Sorry, I was
Yeah.
muted. Just quickly, would
Yes.
you disambiguate the term generative modeling? Because we think of generative as being the term's been stolen, just like the term inference, Raven.
That yeah, that's a fair thing. I feel like I like to say I used to work on the original generative modeling or generative modeling before it was cool. So just think about when you're working at SpaceX, you have this really big piece of a rocket. It's called the first stage, right? It's the part you see that comes off right as it gets sort of halfway through its flight. Um, a big question is how long is it going to take to build a first stage? It was a very common question because you got to get this thing built so you can go actually launch it into space. Um, Now, typically, what let's say a junior data analyst like I would do is you go into your database and you say, well, the first one took 2 days, the second one took 4 days, the fifth one took 6 days, and maybe the other one took 5 days. So you got four data points, and you go, let me just take the average, and you get some number like 4.12. Um, well, that's a number, and you can go tell people it's 4.12. The problem is it's never actually 4.12, right? And you have this variation, and I was struggling to explain this variation in um, well, uh, the next thing that a junior data analyst do, which was me, was you say, well, let me just take the standard deviation because That's what I've been taught in school. It just doesn't work for rockets though, because things aren't normally distributed. Things can't go below zero. That's impossible. You have all these constraints. And I was like, wow, what am I gonna do? Like, I don't feel like I learned enough of the mathematics to describe this. Um, but I got really lucky and I got into this thing called Bayesian modeling, which Hugo, I know you're all about as well. You have great tutorials. So pitch for Hugo. If what I'm saying doesn't make sense, go watch his tutorials. But this Bayesian framework lets you do all sorts of wonderful things. You can specify that your distribution can't be below zero. You can say that maybe it maxes out at 30. And once you set all this, you can use some technology called like MCMC or other estimators to come up with this distribution that you can now sample from. You could say, I've seen these five versions of the past. What is every possible version of the future that I can see given my constraints? And now I had this thing where I could just pull numbers out and say, well, I think we're going to see four a lot, but we might actually see five a bunch too and six a bunch too. We're probably not going to see 12 days, but it might actually happen. But now we can start planning for, okay, we probably think it's going to be between 6 and 7 days. But in case it's 15 days, here's the things we can do because it's not very likely, but there is a chance. That sort of generative thinking of generating all these possibilities and the relative probability that each one would happen unlocked a whole new set of capabilities in what's called decision theory for me to go in and have conversations with people within SpaceX about the various possibilities. To allude to Hugo's point, now the term generative now talks about these large language models, and we're getting all these ChatGPT things and tokens and images and stuff like that. But if you scale it all the way down to what I call a one or two parameter LLM, that essentially is the core of generative modeling.
Yeah, and it actually, in the Bayesian sense, and as we've joked before, we're here to talk about generative AI, but we'd love to do another podcast on statistics, whether you want to
Yeah.
call it Bayesian or not. It does force you to write down your assumptions, and it forces you to write down what you think the data generating process is. What is actually happening in the real world to generate the data you're seeing, and then it helps you make decisions under uncertainty. The other thing that you mentioned, but elided over slightly that I want to kind of drill down into. Your background was in mechanical engineering, which makes sense of how you went to SpaceX, but you were there as a data analyst as well. So it isn't, so I'm very interested in career paths because most of them are non-obvious. How do you go from mechanical engineer to being a data scientist to working on generative AI at Google?
Yeah, so I think one thing that is I'll say has a lot of noise in it as I was navigating through my career and even still as I'm navigating through my career is job titles. I They're just broad labels that different organizations apply to skill sets, and I think people get really fixated on the term data scientist or things like that. So for me, you're right. I have a really weird career because none of my titles actually match. I went from mechanical engineer to industrial engineer to supply chain engineer to Sweetgreen actually literally just called me engineer because they didn't know what category to put me
That's
in.
awesome.
So literally my title was senior engineer, and now I'm at Google. I'm a senior research data scientist. So they put a lot of my old titles together into one. Um, if you read the titles, it becomes hard to understand how that word soup works. But what's been a constant in all this is it started with just mathematics, and even actually mathematics are still being used. I had to learn linear algebra, differential equations, some amount of probability theory in my mechanical degree. I leveled that up when I was at SpaceX, working on learning Bayesian statistics, just as you said, and statistics in general, in under a supply chain engineer title. But that actually got me into what I think is my most fun org, or one of my most fun orgs is PyMC and open source. So by working with those folks, that gave me a lot of the skills and stuff I needed to get to Google as a data scientist. So the through thread in that is just learn the fundamentals, in my opinion. Like really get down, learn the fundamentals, and you'll get the job title that matches the thing you want to do, which is the core mathematics that you're actually working on.
Yeah, and so I love kind of the variance, the spread of the types of companies you've worked at, right? So working
Yeah.
on mechanical engineering stuff at SpaceX, rocket ships, right, through to Sweetgreen, when I lived in New York City, was like my go-to lunch, and I love salads. So you were working for what seems to be a salad making company, but is a very in some ways, Sweetgreen is actually the first salad making company that's also a tech company, right? So maybe you can tell us a bit about kind of the data driven approach there and why they even wanted a data science team.
Yeah, what compelled me to Sweetgreen, if we talk about the company itself, at the time, they wanted to do two things. One is if you really squint at a Sweetgreen, like you just squint your eyes really hard, it actually is a manufacturing plant, right? They just like SpaceX, they get material in. SpaceX get metal, but Sweetgreen gets kale. And then there are people that are skilled at putting those things together, and then it goes out the door in an assembly to a customer. So um, at Sweetgreen, we had to have the right stuff at the right time, and had to get people that could build it, and that looked very much like manufacturing. And then at Sweetgreen in particular, like you said, was is very tech forward. So it was a really great time in my life where I got to use like the AWS stack and a lot of different technologies in the cloud to affect the real world. Um, it was just it was right at that intersection, very similar to SpaceX. Plus, getting a lot of free salads at Sweetgreen, that was a really great perk. So,
Yo, guacamole greens for the win. If anybody hasn't been to Sweetgreen, check it out. And also, like the logistics and supply chain stuff was clearly gnarly. But I've said to you before when I was eating a lot of Sweetgreen, um, this is relevant. I'm not just, I was
no, no,
working
this
in
is
the
good.
Empire
Yeah,
State Building and I was going to the Sweetgreen on Broadway and like 27th in Manhattan or whatever. And you needed to use the app. There were hundreds of, it was like a music festival there, dude, right?
yeah.
They really needed to figure out how to get as many customers in and get them their lunch as possible. Serious concerns about if people wait too long, there'll be churn. So these types of things, in addition to having a good mobile app, I think allowed them to scale incredibly in Manhattan.
Yeah, it's just New York was the Sweetgreen talks about markets where there was like LA, Chicago, New York. New York was just a whole nother level. I remember going to New York and waiting in line. It was like an hour and a half just to get through. People waited the whole time through. It was amazing.
So what's up at Google, dude? What are you working on? What teams do you work with? And what's your general mandate and purview?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, so one is a lot has happened in Google, even more than I know. The company has always been full on steam ahead with generative technology, or let's say AI, as Sooner likes to say. Um, but me in particular, I work right in the intersection of like Google DeepMind and research, and then Google Labs, where we're deploying products to folks. So if you folks want to see some of these and ask questions, there's labs.google.com has all of the public experiments, but it's just exactly what we were saying a little bit at the beginning. There's so much technology that's being developed that's just so fascinating. What is the right way to get it into people's hands? So it's not just some mathematics running on some server in the cloud, but really something that uh, is improving your day-to-day experience, organizing information for you, all the wonderful things that people have come to love Google for.
Very cool. So I've linked to labs.google.com in the chat, and I'll do so in the show notes. Once again, just reminding people here, if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat, and feel free to introduce yourself and let us know what your interests are. Um, I mean, I love, and this is one of the reasons I wanted to chat with you about all of this stuff, that you're working at labs, but at the intersection of DeepMind as well, and also working on research, the wonderful triangle of like research, applied AI, and product. So I'm just wondering what excites you the most about working at this intersection?
I think I saw a post from you about AI applications, and I remember a lot of it resonating with me. But it's um, the 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 key themes are again common echoes from my past. The math is changing every day. It's just new equations or formulas or methods that are just pushing the boundary one step at a time. But the second part is these steps are occurring quite rapidly. It's not like one new innovation today and another one in a year. It's like every even half day at this point, sometimes every day, somebody's come up with something interesting and new, and we're just moving quickly in a lot of different directions. And the interesting thing is it's not just that you just stick on a path and you're just getting incrementally better at the same thing. Let's just say text generation, but we're noticing all these new things that are just unlocking that wasn't possible even like 6 months ago. You're like, oh wow, this now we can now suddenly do this new thing and it might be useful to these new people in this new way. How can we put it together in a way that they can actually get their hands on it? That rapid development is just fascinating to me.
And who is the end user or the goal? Who are you building products for in the
So at Google, we're building products for a lot of people. Enterprise, there's a lot of things that go to folks that are running businesses, and I think we're going to talk about a couple of those things later. But some of them are going just to individuals, like your mother, Hugo. She could use like a Gemini app or notebook or things like that. So it's just for whoever it makes sense to. Some of it is developers. So while I know you're a big data science guy and probably folks in the chat as well, some of these are very data science specific. So there's features that go straight into Colab or experimental data science agents that are meant strictly, well, not strictly, I shouldn't say that, but targeted towards data-minded folks or folks that want to break into data science themselves. So, I mean, you just have to look at each one case by case, and if you want, we can go through specific examples. But for whoever, it'll just make the most sense for.
I would love that actually because as you mentioned we've got Gemini, we've got Gemma, we've got Notebook LM, we have multimodal, we've got vision models, we've got experimental data scientists in collab notebooks and this type of stuff. So maybe yeah, maybe we could do some principal component analysis or talk about like the top five or something like that the team is working on and you're putting out there.
Okay, so going through the ones that I've personally worked on, so then I can talk about it with a bit more depth and clarity. Um, like a big developer focused one that we worked on in labs was AI Studio and the Gemini API. So in that case, we were really thinking about how could the Gemini model be exposed to developers in a way that they could build their own applications. Doesn't have to have Google branding on it. Doesn't have to say it's Google, but just like powering whatever they needed to get done.
And just to be clear, Gemma is the open weight model, but Gemini is the analog of GPT-4o or something like that.
Exactly. Gemini is the massive model. It's one that has multimodal understanding and all sorts of cool features like that. And it is a big, big model, and you access that through the API.
Yep.
Uh, Gemma is an open weights model that you can download the weights and use yourself on your own local device. I actually use both day to day. I use Gemini at work a lot when I'm using the clusters and things like that, and I actually use Gemma on my personal device. When I'm in an airplane and I don't have access to the internet and I still need a code completion agent, for instance. We have a code Gemma variant. So you're right. In that space, we got a lot of things that are targeted for people that are more technical, hands-on, want to get their hands dirty with the weights or code. They want to go and build their own thing.
And just to be clear as well, correct me if I'm wrong, Gemini has a free tier.
Gemini does have a free tier. You can go to aistudio.google.com and it's something like 3 clicks to get an API key.
That's
Uh,
so cool. And look, just to be clear, I'm not paid by Google. I have no affiliation with Google. My friend Ravin works there. But go and check out Gemini's free tier. I'm actually incredibly surprised that and I will name names. They're huge. Like Anthropic doesn't have a free tier. Mistral now has a free tier. OpenAI doesn't have a free tier. The reason I'm interested in this is as an educator, I go to conferences and teach stuff. And the fact that to use OpenAI, I need to get learners to put in a credit card is ridiculous. So props to you and Mistral for having free tiers. It's stupid. I'll be on the record of saying that. Give me like 60 cents of free credits for students or something. So also I yeah, look. So I don't know if you've used I don't know if you MLC chat.
I'm not.
This is an app which you can see like recently when Llama 3.2, I just put Llama 3.2 3B on my phone the day it was released and was able to chat with it on my phone. Before that, I had Gemma 2, 2B, right? So I'm sorry, I've
No,
interrupted,
no, go
but
ahead.
the ability to be able, this is amazing, man, to be able to take
Yeah.
open weight models and put them on my cell. So now we're talking about the actual models. Do you want to kind of maybe give us a rundown of the language models and vision models and kind of like even how many parameters they are and that type of stuff? Get a bit technical.
There's oh man, if we're gonna be sitting here all day if we're talking about models, let me double check I have my latest understanding. But there, I mean, let's
I'm
see.
sorry, this may be going a bit too deep. So I
Oh
do
no
want to
no
step
no
back at some point and hear about the other things you're working on, of course.
no, this is great. Let's do it. I would there's maybe one fine point I could put here, which is great. Is there are sort of there are a lot of everything's called large language model now, or there are many large language models now. But the way I tend to segment it into my head are there ones that are so big they have to run on the cloud. Like there's
Yep.
no possible way you could run them on your own.
ADB.
even bigger than that. So you got to go to an API and you got to get them. But these models tend to have, these days have audio understanding, vision understanding. They're really good at reasoning. Like if I need something that requires all of that, like heavy horsepower, think like semi truck level type of stuff, then I'm going to go to the cloud and I'm going to use the latest and greatest. Not only just in models, but you have to remember there's an entire stack under those models. Like there's a heavily optimized server cluster that's running, custom software that really just makes it a smooth and easy experience, even though you're doing crazy amounts of crazy computation. But every now and then I don't need all of that horsepower. And in that case, I use a smaller model like a Gemma 2B or 27B. And that lets me run just locally on device. I don't have to worry about the internet connections or HTTP requests. I can sometimes I like just going to the park and doing my work there, but I don't have an internet connection. Uh, Maybe you're on your phone and you need it there. These smaller models are really good for those things. Now they don't quite have the same reasoning capabilities. Not all of them have the multimodal capability quite yet. But for text-to-text tasks, or especially for coding, because coding is a text-to-text, highly constrained space, um, then I'll use one of these smaller models instead. That's
Awesome.
my personal philosophy. Yeah.
So we've touched on Gemini, on Gemma. If you
hmm
want to say anything else about those, please do. But otherwise, we can kind of talk about some of the other products you've worked on and are working on.
Well, yeah, let's switch to that because it's while we were talking about how people use things, these developer products are really good for people that know code or can take text LM outputs and put them into their own thing, but not everyone is like that. There's most of the world are not developers. So another part of my work at Google is packaging these things into, user interfaces and things that make it easy for folks to access, and they don't have to worry about the underlying code. You want to jump into
I'd,
those, Hugo?
I'd love to.
Okay. So I think Hugo dropped the link to labs.google.com. You'll see a bunch of them there. But the one that, I'm frankly the most excited about personally right now, and I have a bias because I'm working on it, but is Notebook LM and audio overviews. So if folks have seen it or tried it, when you go to Notebook LM, you don't see anything that screams uh, AI or LLM or whatnot to you. It's actually meant, the interface much more is as the name implies, like a notebook, and you put your sources in and you put your stuff in and your ideas and your thoughts. But now instead of just having them in let's say a physical notebook, we use Gemini to help you chat with your notes. That was the first, core feature of Notebook LM. And the second part now is there's a little button you can hit, and it'll actually just generate a podcast for you in about a couple minutes, uh, using Gemini and other technology to take all your sources and create an audio format. And the reason I love it so much is I think it really highlights this transformative element of the new generative sort of capabilities that we have. Our computers can now take things that are in text or video or images and turn them into text, audio, text or audio right now. And it, as a human, it just, sometimes I have a really hard time reading research papers, for instance, just pouring through the details. But when I put it in a notebook and I hit the audio overviews, I get this sort of explain like I'm five summary, and that just helps me understand the concepts more. So when I need to go back and actually read the paper, I'm just that many more steps ahead than I used to be.
Mm,
It To me, it feels magical, even though I know how the whole thing works.
absolutely. And I do think, to your point, products like Notebook LM to be able to make these types of models more accessible is fantastic. We can drill deeper into Notebook LM or talk about a few more other products and then pivot back. Why don't you tell us about a few other things? And
Okay. The challenge I'm having, I'm gonna need to think through because some of these products are gonna be coming out soon, so I can't talk
yeah,
about
yeah,
them just
totally.
yet. But on our next podcast, we can come back to them. Another product that I'm really excited about, especially from labs, I'm trying to think about the ones that are public, but this is actually one that isn't as there's one called Breadboard, and I'm gonna find the GitHub link for you.
Great.
Um, I'm typing away at my second screen to make sure I'm giving you the latest and greatest. Um,
Fantastic.
there's there's an app called Breadboard, or not an app. It's a visual programming language that another team within Labs is trying, and it's a way for folks that are not writing. It's a way for folks to put together LLM applications in a visual block sort of coding style rather than just straight code. And the reason I like it is I've had a lot of um, I've had a lot of parents actually, because now that I'm 30 or 35 and whatnot, and they have kids, they're asking how can their kids get into generative AI and how can they learn and they see it as just the next wave of technology and they want their children to you know be able to use it for their own work, be able to get work, use it in their learning. Um, and it's a bit much to say, oh, you got to go learn Python to like really understand what's going on. Like, spin up a Conda environment and get an API key. Um, Still, it's too much for an 8-year-old or maybe 9-year-old. But Breadboard is this in between where it allows kids to, or any adults as well, but to put together LLM applications using blocks. So they don't have to understand all the underlying code details or whatnot, but they can get a block that says generate text, and then they get text, and they can put another block that does another thing, and that gets them into LLM applications without having to dive full bore into a computer science background with LLM understanding and tokens and all this sort of stuff. So um, I also being an open source person just appreciate the open source nature of the whole thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think, I mean, a lot of the time, the mental model of Lego blocks and building blocks is actually incredibly important across the board for the type of work we do. It always has been in data science and machine learning, and data engineering, right? Um, but even more so with generative AI, because we're really coming back. What becomes very important with generative AI is composability. Again, it always has been important, but figuring out how to build these systems, essentially, which consist of a variety of generative, quote unquote, microservices or something like that, and connecting them up to build a more robust system that can do a lot of multimodal things and so on.
Yeah, I just fully agree with you. It's another block in this whole toolbox that we've had, but just a really crazy interesting block.
So I do want to continue speaking about products and UIs for non-technical people. But
Mhm.
before that, we've got a great question in the chat from Noble Ackerson. Great question from a great name. I love this question because I struggle with this, and I don't think there's much science to it, to be honest, yet. But
Mhm.
the question is, what is the rubric or framework to determine which model to choose for a given product objective? I'm surprised decisions are often hand wavy, vibe based at this point in Gen AI maturity. Now, I'm not going to answer that. I want your thoughts on that. What I will say is that this isn't new. Machine learning has been like that. Like we're getting to more scientific machine learning in a lot of ways, but machine learning and data science have often felt like incantations of some sort as well, right?
Yeah, I fully agree with you. One is I say I think Hugo, I've seen that you're gonna have an LLM applications course coming out pretty soon.
Exactly. Yeah,
So
on Maven.
I'm gonna give a pitch. I've always enjoyed. I haven't seen. Okay, while we talk about caveats, I've not seen Hugo's course or any of the course material, but I've seen a lot of Hugo's prior material, with Bayesian statistics and all that, and I know his course is gonna be good. So I have a suspicion you're gonna answer this question in your course, and the folks in your chat should go watch that. Um, I'm also to your point. I get this question so much that I wrote pieces of it into this guidebook. I think we're gonna talk about,
We
but
are,
I'm
and
gonna
I'll
write
link to it.
more into the guidebook for literally people that just need guidance like this. Um, the the Blithy answer I'll give you the quick one is I think people jump way too fast to trying to pick a model. When they come, they're like, I want to do this thing. I want to build this new application that does all these things. Which model do I need? Do I need a GPT? Do I need a Gemini? Do I need a Llama? Like, they get really hung up on that. I really think what people need to do, and actually advise people to do, is you should go, what are the evaluations I need to check my thing actually works? Like forget the model, forget the code. Just what are the inputs that are going to go into my system? Is it text, image, what type, what's the formatting, are there typos, who's providing it, and what are the outputs that I need? And come up with 10 examples. Actually, I'm going to say come up with 20 examples. 10 will be like the good case where everything works perfectly. And then 10 will be like what malformed inputs, things that are wrong, things that could come in but not be quite correct. And once you have that, then you can go to the models and say, let me try a Gemini and see if it does the thing I needed to do. Does it? Okay, awesome. I know this is at least possible with the latest frontier tech. So it's going to be expensive. I'll have to use the internet potentially, or I don't want to say it's going to be expensive, but it's going to require a big model. Um, okay, but at least we know it's possible with Gen AI today. But now let me actually like creep down the ladder and go to a Gemma 9B. Does it still work? Is my thing still working? If it works in Gemma 9B, then awesome. Now you've got two models you can pick from, and you got all the choices of how you want to do things. But it's that I think that's the principled way to work with Gen AI product building right now, build your evaluation set first and think about the model second. But Hugo, actually, I want to kick it back to you because I haven't heard your thoughts on this and I want to get a preview. Um, what do you think? Like, what would your answer be?
Yeah. So I totally agree. I think you want to think about translating whatever business challenge you're trying to solve
Yeah.
into an evaluation framework.
Okay.
But on the other side of it, you want to think about the data you have as well. And that may involve user conversations, user interactions. Let's say it's customer support, previous interactions with customer support. Let's say it's email outreach, then you want to make sure you know exactly what data you have there. And once you have an eval framework and knowledge of the data you'll be using, and then use that to generate synthetic data, which I think is going to be increasingly more and more important. Then figure out which model you're going to use. And to be honest, I eval framework incredibly important. Um, Data, I honestly think data over methods, even more so than it used to be with ML, right? Like you may be able to switch out a model to get better performance, but if you have higher fidelity, more high signal data, either fine tuning on it or using in context learning or using it to do what some people call prompt engineering, what I call prompt alchemy, I think is incredibly important. But that's always been the case with ML as well. Like when people would say, should I use a neural network to do
Yeah.
this, you
Or
know,
XGBoost, right? Yeah.
exactly,
Which,
or logistic regression, it's
yeah.
like, why don't you start with a baseline model? And actually, I like that you suggest try the state of the art model first to see what performance you get here. Because in ML, I'd always say do the opposite. If you're doing binary classification, I'd say don't start with machine learning. Start with a majority classifier and then see what lift machine learning gives you. Like you'll never actually deploy a majority classifier, right?
Yeah.
But it's a baseline that allows you then to see what lift you get from different machine learning models. And then you need to take into account, I mean, it's more obvious with generative AI, the cost we're talking about when we're pinging vendor APIs at scale. But in machine learning, if you're using sophisticated models and you that maybe aren't interpretable, these types of things, all of these things are costs in a variety of ways. So maybe, it was a decade ago that we're all building logistic regression models that really help businesses, do the predictions they needed. Some people called it AI then, right? Because they had
Yeah.
to.
They're good at marketing.
But
Yeah.
yeah, but I don't think the details have changed, right? And we can
No.
get to that, but having robust evals and knowing what your data is and knowing what your prompts are. And this is, our mutual friend Hamill has a blog post called "Fuck you, show me the prompt." And I'm quoting him explicitly,
Yeah.
and I approve of his cussing there because we need it. Because at that point, still so many frameworks, you're trying to build an information retrieval system or something, and the framework doesn't even allow you to introspect to what the prompt is, so you can barely look at your data. So solving all of these things is important. To the question about evaluations as well, though, I do want to kind of think about a graded approach to evaluations. So actually, we did a lightning talk, which I'll link to in the show notes, for our Maven course on building LLM powered applications for software developers and data scientists. And we went through an example where, let's say you're a recruiter, and you're consuming LinkedIn profiles and you want to you want to automate emails to potential good candidates, right? Um, Now, at a basic LLM level, you can see, wait, did it extract the correct information in a structured form that allows me to populate these emails? That's kind of cool. Like, well, you need that, right? But that's an LLM micro eval. Then you can sit down with the person who used to write the emails, and they should be part of this conversation. Maybe you should put the emails in a spreadsheet, in a Google sheet, which allows them to plus one, minus one, like thumbs up, thumbs down them, right? And we see that in a lot of like ChatGPT, for example. You can plus one, minus one, those types of things that allows them to label whether these emails are actually appropriate or not. I think another point there is that, there's usually a human doing these things beforehand, right? Most of the things we build ML and AI for are things that humans do that don't scale. So we want to involve computation to allow them to scale. So we've got the first one is, did the LLM extract the right information? The second level is, do these emails look like what the human would approve of, right? But this still, I mean, all of these things are important. The real question, though, is do you hire good candidates? Okay. So do you get responses to emails? Do you get people in the interview flow? This is a long-term goal, and a lagging indicator in a lot of ways, but it is your actual goal. So you want to tie the eval back to that final value of do you actually get good candidates? And that I think that really what that speaks to is systems thinking, like thinking through the entire, we're not just building models or using models, we're building software systems that automate certain things. And then do they deliver the actual business value? So we want that macro eval, and we want to think about perhaps all these levels of evaluation as well in that example. But I'm interested if that resonates with the way you think.
Yeah, I was gonna say I just actually love the way that you put that. I think um I won't put you in this camp, but maybe I'll put myself in. As someone that's interested in the math, right? It gets really easy to be myopic on what's the latest model or what's the parameter size or things like that. But especially when you're thinking about applications like you just mentioned, what actually none of that actually matters. Truly, what matters is did we get the candidate at the end, um, and just the way you unfolded that as well. Like this application is acting in a human system where there's signals coming in from all over the place, right? It's not just the text and texting out to the model, but there's the responses, there's the people that wrote the emails, there's the actual end goal of whether the you got the right person or not, and these things all support um, the generative model or LLM or whatever you put in the middle. Um, it's not that the model should outshine, frankly, any of those other factors. Um,
Absolutely. I also think this is a great way to manage expectations with business lead. Look, executives, business leaders have so many incoming pressures to use AI, dude. Like they've got shareholders, board members, competitive landscape. What shareholder, board
yeah.
member? What's our AI strategy? We need it. And so they come to you and they're like, "What's our AI strategy?" And it's our job in a lot of ways to understand their incentives and look for the meaning under the words, right? Because they want to keep generating business value, right? And they have an obligation to shareholders to do that as well, for better or for worse, a legal obligation. But what they're really saying is that they want to keep up with modern technology, but they don't want to start messing stuff up as well. So if you can show them that a logistic regression actually delivers more business value, and you can brand that as some form of AI as well, and you can maybe add a bit of generative flavor at the end to certain things. That's what they want. They're not necessarily saying we need to use AI across the board, right? So if you can speak to their business needs as much as possible and understand their real needs, I think that very much. And I honestly think I tell that to a lot of people because everyone's freaked, right, about needing to use AI at the moment. So I think managing those expectations within an org, understanding the external pressures, is a way to reset expectations and get the work done.
Yeah, I think you hit the head on the nail right there. Um, a lot of people are trying to figure out how they can put this in. I would say the counter risk, which you're pointing a good way, is a lot of people feel like they have to force generative AI into their company or business just ham-handedly somewhere in a non-principled way. But the framework you just suggested is a great way to think about uh, where is it actually going to make sense in the context of the thing that I'm doing, or the company that I'm working at, or the org that you're happening to lead.
Yeah. And also, let's say you have a customer service agent. First, deploy it internally to your
Yeah.
customer service people before deploying it externally,
Yeah.
please. Because otherwise you'll see all the nonsense that we've seen. Secondly, you don't necessarily need to have one big LLM call and stuff the prompt and YOLO and hope it, because then you end up with stuff which, your former company would probably like, whereby someone goes to Ford's website or whatever and asks, what's the best car? And it says a Tesla, right?
Yeah.
So you can avoid those types of things. If you're building these systems, get them to respect your business logic. Don't let them do things outside your business logic, and then perhaps add a bit of generative flavor at the end as well. Like you can literally build a pre-LLM style chatbot that maybe uses LLMs to understand the intent of the user as opposed to old school natural language understanding, then embed it in business logic, then get the response, then add some generative flavor. Now that's a lot more work, but it has a lot less failure mode. So I think now we're seeing more ways to embed LLMs in production application without letting them go absolutely wild. Um, so I do want to jump into, firstly, I always forget the difference between jealousy and envy, but I experience one of those towards you.
Uh,
I'm so happy for you that you get to no, but that you get to work across, you get to work on foundation models and all the nitty gritty of training and fine tuning and all of
yeah.
these things, RLHF or DPO, all of these things, all the way through to building user um, facing products. And I think that's probably quite rare these days. But what type of skill set do you need? Like if someone wanted to get into this line of work, like it seems like you span the gamut, right?
Yeah, I think I got lucky, or maybe I became this generalist by accident, but I think maybe I would, you don't need all these skills, but I'd say maybe segment yourself into where you would like to be, and then get the skills closer to that. But one is if you want to be closer to like the application builder that Hugo is talking about, um, then you're gonna have to be the titles there would be like program manager or product manager, and a lot of those skills, frankly, are not technical. They're human understanding skills, just as Hugo mentioned. It's understanding businesses, being able to empathize with the executive and the customer service rep and figure out how to tie their processes together. Because with that empathy, then you'll understand how the technical solutions can solve their pain. Like that's I'd say that's the application developer sort of spiel that Hugo just gave for the last 10 minutes. The other one, which is a little bit more concrete, and people tend to go to, is if you want to be an AI researcher, then you're going to have to get a lot of nitty gritty math skills, right? You're going to have to understand how JAX or PyTorch works, put together models, um, train a couple on your own, understand gradient descent and derivatives, and how those two come together. Read float values from disk and understand what quantization means, since that's a key tool in the application, or sorry, in the AI developers toolbox these days. Um, and I think you necessarily don't have to do one or the other. Like these things are now blending together. Um, but I would tend to think which one you'd like to trend towards first, and then get a strong foothold in one of those, and then bridge the gap if you'd like to then bridge the gap.
So are we also at a different point where we can build systems and use models without training them now? Which is
Yeah,
incredible. Now, this isn't quite new though. I think people are like, wow, vendor APIs now. People forget all the amazing work Hugging Face did over a long period of time to allow us to do that with inference endpoints as well. And not just Hugging Face, right? It's a entire community. But so I've encountered people who can build generative AI applications who don't even know about neural networks, can't fine tune that type of stuff. They ping APIs, they understand kind of the data mindset, which, as we spoke to before, evaluations and looking at your data incredibly important. Um, do you see for people building applications that knowing about how to train, knowing about the math behind neural networks, is that still needed, or can we import software engineers into this entire landscape now?
yeah, I think so. You're right. There's this third category that's in between that I should have put a finer point on, and I'm glad you actually came back to this point. Uh, I'll just be frank with you. I don't entirely get how pieces of the internet work these days, but I can import requests from Python and get my stuff off the internet into code. And a similar thing I think is definitely happening in this modeling landscape. I think I would say a big shift from when you and I were doing data science in the 2010s to now is something you just hit on a whole bunch, is that at that time you had to download a scikit-learn or something and specify a model and at least see some math, even if you were just an application developer. But now in the LLM landscape in the 2020s, like you said, Hugging Face and others, Google and OpenAI and whatnot, they have these really nice APIs where you don't have to train the model yourself. And actually, for a lot of reasons we could talk about separately, I think for large models, people are never going to train these models themselves. It's too
Mm.
expensive and whatnot. You're just going to take a pre-trained foundational model and use it. That is the rational thing to do now, rather than what we used to do, Hugo, which is initialize a Bayesian model and then train it, or an XGBoost model and train it from scratch. Um, But yeah, these people, if you want to be, let's call an AI developer, you don't have to know what's going on under the hood in a great amount of detail. You can just use an API and some prompt alchemy, as you so bluntly put, and understand get. I think for now you're going to get a pretty good initial version of the application. I do think that where I'm seeing people get stuck though is if you can't get there with just natural language instruction, um, then if you don't understand what top sampling is or top K or temperature, or if you don't super understand how tokenization works, these layers of abstraction start breaking around the edges and you could get into trouble. So there's a lot of things now I think you could build without having to understand any of these details. Um, but if you're really going to get into it, I would still advise that you understand the basics, just so when that layer of abstraction breaks, you know where to go and how to fix things. So, yeah, not necessary perhaps, but recommended is my
I
current advice. We might move to a place real quick where we don't need this at all anymore, maybe in 2 or 3 years. But right at this moment, just understand a little bit.
so I'll say something and then I'll ask something. I don't know if I've
Yeah.
ever said this publicly. I called this podcast "Vanishing Gradients" for numerous reasons. One, and it's actually not the most important reason, but one reason is I think you can work with deep learning systems. This was pre these types of API calls as well. I think you can build deep learning systems. Without knowing multivariate calculus. But once you get a vanishing gradient problem, maybe you need to know a bit
Oh,
about multivariate calculus. So I
that's a
was
good
thinking
point.
about the abstraction layers necessary there. My question is, though, I love that you said we may get to a point where these things aren't necessary. Let's use the car analogy, right? Like, I don't need to when I drive a car, I don't need to understand the internal combustion engine. If I'm a Formula One race car driver, I need to know a few more things, right? So, what will it take to get us to a point where people can use and build these systems without knowing the calculus or multivariate calculus, and which involves linear algebra for those.
This is such a good question because I I'm gonna pull some threads from an earlier discussion that we had. Like, so being a mechanical engineer, I know exactly how an internal combustion engine works, but I don't need that skills day to day. My mom doesn't know how an internal combustion works, but she still drives the same car I do. So I think if I take my original analogy and then actually switch it back to yours, is yeah, she doesn't need to know how a car works, uh, but when there's an issue, she has someone she can go to. So there's a function which is a mechanic, and there's an entire ecosystem built that when she runs into an issue, she can have someone debug what's going on. I don't in LLMs right now. I don't necessarily know that there's a go and every organization has that go-to person that's like their IT person for LLMs. Actually, maybe I'll take computers. A lot of people use computers and have no idea how they work at their day-to-day jobs. When they run into an issue, they run to an IT person, and then the IT person solves it for them. I don't think we have that for with every technology. I think we're always going to run into issues, whether it's cars or computers. But other technologies have had that job class of people that figure it out for them. We just don't have, I don't think we have that class of people yet. So I'd say that's one thing that needs to be built is as this just like a restaurant in 1950 did not have an IT department. Like
Mm.
they straight up did not have one. But Sweetgreen now had an IT department because we use computers even though it was a restaurant company. Similarly, I feel like a lot of businesses probably are going to end up having consultancies or AI mechanics as a job function. I think the second one is if we go back to cars again, the early versions of cars had hand cranks, and you learned that an engine had to rotate
Mm.
because you had to do it yourself, and they didn't have electric starters. But once they got electric starters, a lot of people don't even understand how a car starts these days. They just push a button, frankly, for a mechanical car.
Dude, there are no keys anymore.
There's no keys, not even keys. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not even a thing. So I think the car manufacturers got better at building layers of abstraction over their engine. The engine didn't change, but they added a new component that made it easier. I think the same thing is happening also with the generative technologies, right? Um, you I don't know what it is because if I knew what it is, I would have a startup maybe or something. But there's going to be additional technologies built like electric starters that abstract away the LM in a way that make it easier for people to use and not have to worry about how a crankshaft turns over on a cold start. Um, and there are a lot of people trying a lot of different abstraction layers right now to figure it out. Um, but I think it feels like in the next couple of years we're going to end up with two or three other key pieces of technology that just hide away these things. when you run into an issue on an LLM, it can self-correct itself rather than you having to debug it yourself. You were just talking about this earlier, um, alluding to you build your application and you use your initial test cases to figure out the inputs and the outputs. But there could be a version of LLMs, and we're kind of starting to see it with agentic frameworks, where the agent itself figures out that it did something wrong and it fixes it even before you know what's going on. Stuff like that is just incredible to me.
Um, you had to say the word agent, didn't
I
you?
did. I just,
You
it's
know,
sorry. I know.
this is
It's a
not
good
a
ice
LinkedIn. This
podcast,
is
and I
not a
just,
LinkedIn post, bro.
I know.
No, no, I'm like all jokes aside, I'm very excited about
Yeah.
agents and agentic frameworks. Maybe you could tell us a bit about how you feel about agents, what's happening, whatever you can say at Google Labs with respect to agents and so on.
Yeah, to Hugo's point, I think agents are a little bit overhyped right now, so I don't want to steer the whole podcast towards this thing. But it's just this idea that instead of just making one call with an LM, it's able to act on its own outputs. So in a regular, let's say, Gen AI call, you pass in some text, tell me a recipe about eggs, and it gives you, let's say, some text back. In an agentic framework, the LM can say, actually, you know what? Let me actually revise this because I could make it better. And when I say, I'm anthropomorphizing a bit, but the thing can act on its own outputs and then it can go do a bunch of stuff. And now we're seeing this in all sorts of areas. So you're seeing it in code, you're seeing it in text generation, you're seeing it in a lot of different products. It's a really neat it's just a really neat capability that some of these systems have because as we were just talking about earlier, instead of you having to write a bunch of code yourself to put things together, this thing is smart enough to do it itself. The analogy I like using is maybe LLMs right now are like a 2-year-old toddler. You have to specify every step to build a peanut butter sandwich. You have to be like, oh, put the peanut butter on. Oh, the knife fell. Maybe you should go pick it up. And you know, you talk to a child, you have to instruct a lot to get the child to be able to complete a task. Um, if I was an adult and I'm making a peanut butter sandwich, you just expect me to get it done and fix all the mistakes myself. And that is a bit of what's happening in, let's say, an agentic project, if I have a rough analogy. But
Yeah.
super fast moving space. We should, I mean, either I could be back as a guest in a year, or you should get a guest in a year that can talk about this because it is a lot of innovation is happening all together in this space.
Absolutely. And the power of agentic approaches to ping
Mhm.
APIs and gather information and take actions
Just
as
do
well.
things.
I think
Yeah.
there's some pretty weird, like YOLO danger vibes happening where, agentic approaches with go and buy me something, right? Here's my credit card information. And you're like, okay, we need to like just imagine a hallucination in the middle of that. But I am increasingly interested in the types of products you're building and interfaces you're interested in. Last time we spoke, you mentioned I just want to keep returning to real world value
Yeah, yeah.
as
Let's do
well,
that.
though. And you mentioned a bakery automation project, and I thought that was a fascinating example of using AI to streamline workflows. So maybe you could tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, this is a project I worked on with the Gemma model in particular. So actually, it's very analogous to things we were talking about at Sweetgreen or the email assistant that you had just brought up for recruiting. Um, the mindset I had here, and I'd say, I mean, I don't know how to say this without spurring more jealousy or envy in you, but I'm really lucky, and I think a lot of AI builders are really lucky that we get access to insane amounts of compute at Google or even at home. I have a 4090 RTX, so I got a lot of VRAM, but there's a lot of people, like you said, that are not living in AI world day to day. Like they're not in this day to day. They're literally at just a bakery. Like they run a bakery or some sort of other small business, uh, but they're just getting a lot of emails. And when can I get this kind of cake? Can you come at this time? What products do you offer? They're getting all this information in through text, and for them to go in and answer a lot of these questions, they have to take time away from doing the thing that people pay for because people don't pay a bakery to answer emails, right? They usually pay a bakery for the baked goods. So, um, and I don't assume a lot of people open a bakery to say, you know what, I love getting a lot of customer. I love getting random emails for customers. Like I'm going to start a bakery to get as much random email as possible. They usually
Mm.
start. I assume they start a bakery because they have some love of baking and want to produce things. So now, but you have this bakery started. You're getting all this free text email coming in for what your products are, what you can offer, and things like that. You're not working at a Google where you got a gazillion hours of compute, and you don't have an AI engineer on staff. Uh, how can you use this technology to improve and make your life easier for what you're doing, which is baking goods? Um, And in that, I made this tutorial that's like, if I was someone who was working at a bakery, how would I access these systems? What kind of compute would I have, and what would I need? And in that framework, it was like, okay, let's build a model that uses Gemma because that's a reasonably sized model that's cheaper to use than a humongous model. Um, let's use a collab interface because while it's not it's an easier place to start for most folks to start programming, and you've seen this in tutorials. Starting with a collab abstracts away a lot of the environment details and whatnot. And let's just start with the emails that they're already getting. Is it possible to make a bot that can transform your emails? And
Mm.
it turns out now that yeah, it is with a Gemma model. It's easy to go in and do this sort of thing. For somebody who has an afternoon at a small business to read a tutorial, spin up a collab that I've already created for them, take some of their emails. I'm not even talking about hundreds of emails, thousands of emails, like big scale. Like take 10 or 20 of the emails that they just got this day, and automatically transform that into an ordering application. And to that point about business value as well, this thing connects to a Flask front end, which makes it easy to get these in a format that isn't just JSON, but something that a bakery staff could read. And so
Wait, do you have resources for this online now that we can
yeah.
share?
There's a whole YouTube video where you just type in I'll
Amazing.
pull it up for you.
Please.
Um, if you type in let me type let me figure out the search terms, or I could put it in the show notes. Um, I'll put it in the show notes. But if you
Yeah,
type in
sounds good.
there's a whole tutorial on YouTube where you can watch the video. It's 11 minutes long. But the collab and everything else has been open source and whatnot. So it's one click for somebody now to go to a collab and try it out on whatever their business happens, whatever they happen to be doing. But it's really, Hugo, like you said, it's that idea of business value. Like, what is it that these businesses need? What is it that what skill sets would they have available to them to actually make this thing? Because you know, it's cool. Yeah, cool LLMs can do your bakery stuff, but it requires you to have like an AI engineer full time, spending 6 months on a research project. Probably a little bit out of reach for a bakery, right? Like, can it be done? Yes. Is it feasible for somebody who's baking goods to take a 6 month sabbatical to learn AI? No. But we're just at this magical moment where there's enough, free technology out there. There's enough infrastructure like collabs and GPUs and the cloud in nice wrapped up interfaces that somebody who works is a little bit technically minded or has a teenager at home that is learning Python, um, for them to spend 6 hours in this case $0 to $20 and really get something that they can actually use in their business to make their lives easier.
Yeah. And to your point, the ability to hire AI engineers very much ties into business value as well. My hot take is that if we go back to data science, my hot take is that 2010, the 2010s was the decade of data science. And in fact, I'm extremely bullish on data powered software and data powered decision making in the medium to long term. I think that much is obvious. I think people probably think I'm bullish on it in the short term. I'm actually not. I actually think data science hasn't delivered its promise that it had in the 2010s. A lot of people hired a lot of headcount with significantly high salaries and didn't see the return on investment. I think FANG companies did, and there's kind of a short tail of other companies, but non-digital native companies definitively didn't. And I think unless as AI developers, we show to businesses how valuable it can be, it's going to be the same thing. There's an AI winter coming anyway, but I think it will be exacerbated if we don't figure out, especially with the kind of significantly high prices of headcount for AI engineers. You hire a team of a few AI engineers, and we're already talking over $1 million
$1 million,
purely
yeah.
in headcount, and that's before insurance and all of these associated costs, right? So that all I'm saying is that's another reason to be very motivated about demonstrating business value to your business leaders as well. I do want to now move to thinking more about UX
Okay.
and interface design being critical for adoption. So, and also products being critical for adoption. So,
Yeah.
I'll give two examples. The first one is close to your heart. Notebook LM has been around for some time, right? But it was someone chanced upon this podcast functionality, and it blew up in the cultural consciousness. Similarly, our ChatGPT moment wasn't due to new transformer architectures and new models, it was due to a thin wrapper around existing models. Um, in order to try to get more users. I don't even think OpenAI expected it to blow up in the way it did. But my point is that the reason we had our chat GPT moment at that point wasn't because of a new model. It was because of a product choice and a user experience. So what is the role of UX and products in general adoption?
Well, I will push back on that. I agree with you mostly, but I want to. There's a bit of a nuance I want to put on that last chat GPT thing, which is um, certainly the UX and putting it out there was a key part of it, but there was a conscious decision somebody, and I haven't ever worked at OpenAI, so I don't know for sure, but there was a conscious decision somebody made that it's like, let's take these models and chat tune them in a way that would be good for the general consumer. I know within Google, I can tell you for sure this does happen. I worked on the first APIs that we released called Text Bison, and I was part of the deliberate effort where we said, what is it? We've got this model. What is it? How could we tweak it just a little bit, like not a lot, but how could we salt it and tweak it just a little bit so it speaks in a way that people really want to use?
Yeah. So
And so it takes
I do
both. Yeah,
agree.
go
Sorry,
ahead.
my point wasn't that it wasn't somewhat intentional. My point is that there wasn't the expectation that this would create such a huge moment where everyone started to scramble for
Ah,
generative AI. Yeah.
Got no, that's a good point. And I think you're right on that one. Like clearly, ChatGPT was the moment where we realized that this. A lot of people realized, I mean, even including me, frankly, that this isn't just a technology that's useful in a large company, but to the general public. And I think that maybe that cuts to the crux of your question about products, Hugo. Is it that what makes it that a model is useful for researchers doing some very esoteric task versus the general public, um, who maybe your point isn't necessarily like an AI nerd, but just needs to do the day-to-day thing that they want to
Mm.
do. Is that the
Yeah,
correct? Okay.
absolutely.
So one is I'll say I'll put it in two ways. Um, the I'm not a UX designer, first off. So I'm going to be speaking for a discipline that I'm not worked in, even though I've had a thousand random titles. But I do work with a lot of great UX designers within Google directly on my team for Notebook and other products. And so there's people that are formally trained in UX design and PhDs and things like that, that are thinking really hard about how is it that we can expose this technology in a way that really just works for people. So I'm going to be paraphrasing the things that I've learned from them, but again, I'm not the core person on the team that does this. Um, so alluding to what you said is like we've got all this cool tech and you can write Python and whatnot to get to it. Um, but in the context of the value that you're intending to derive from the system, what is the best interface to get you to the thing that you need? So with Notebook LM, for instance, I specifically worked on the audio overviews feature of that product. Um, and when I was working on audio overviews, we realized something that, we there's another team within labs that's already working on this thing called Notebook LM. People put a lot of sources in there already. They've already invested some time into building their own chat notebooks. Um, we're at a point where we think you can have these podcast hosts talk to you about your stuff. So the interface there isn't even just like a something you see on the screen, but it's like the interface is literally just audio. Like how cool would it be to just listen to your content? And so the kind of the first thing there is like, okay, we're getting away from the screen interface. I think there's a lot of focus right now on screens, which I'm not saying is a bad thing, but like uh, things you have to look at on a phone or on a computer. But the audio interface has been there for a bit with a lot of audio things, but we're again, like I said earlier, there's this inflection point where there's a different type of audio experience we can get that we're now seeing from the new technology coming from the Gemini team or the GDM team. Um, so we built some early prototypes internally, quick evaluations like we talked about earlier, and we're like, and some collabs, and we're like, actually, this is pretty promising. Um, you can, with some wiring and collabs, you can create audio that sounds really compelling. It's like, but who are the type of people are they going to use this? And realize it could be anybody. It could be students. It could be researchers. It could be people planning Thanksgiving if you're in the U.S. or Canada. It could be anybody. So, okay, the clear interface for this is not some technical thing at the moment, at least on this user group. Maybe it's just adding a button in Notebook where you can just click one button and you get your audio out. And like honestly, if you go look at the interface for audio overviews, there's really not much to it. You literally click one button and you get what you need. And honest, that's what we settled on. And we had all this powerful technology behind the back end that made that one button really powerful. And now you've seen a lot of people adopt it because, I mean, they weren't compelled by the button. They were compelled by the experience they got once they got that audio overview. And maybe to underscore the last thing to belie this point is. It doesn't require the super complicated UX to make these magical moments happening. Um, it was just in this case refining the technology to where this one button click made a lot of magic happen. And so I don't I think maybe the other way I can put it is I think if you remember web design, I feel like there was this explosion where everyone realized they could put buttons on your website, and you suddenly had these websites with a ton of buttons like all over the place, you know, and they had all these links and everything like that. But over time, I think we've seen website interfaces simplified to make them easier to use, and I feel like we're in this similar trend with these AI systems. It's I think every application now is trying to put all these buttons in or controls or things like that. But we're learning the new ways to simplify back to something that a lot of people can use or um, makes sense with the technology that we're starting to get. Um, I just it's hard to say, but there's so many cool things happening in this space that I want to have a podcast with you in like 6 months, like or maybe a year where we follow up
Absolutely.
because I really think there's a lot of interface changes that are coming in ways that we just are starting to.
I'd
I
I'd I'd love that, and I do.
I just having a tough time even explaining how you're seeing my excitement
Yeah,
over
and
here.
we were talking about the web recently, but I do think we're all very bullish on the web. In the late 90s, we had dot-com bust, and then we had a huge amount of value created and captured through Google, YouTube, social media. I do think two tools that we forget a lot about are Blogger. I think Blogger and then WordPress, then Squarespace, this trajectory of tools that allowed non-technical people. Sure, sometimes you got to do a code injection, that can be annoying. But allowing non-technical people to create content on the website, on the internet, right? And the other tool I love, historically, is Optimizely, creating a front-end user experience for people to run online experiments without having all the technical know-how. It was absolutely incredible, and I'm excited. I think Notebook LM is a step in that direction, which I'm very excited about. I do want to have a slightly nuanced conversation now. I want to give a
Go
few
ahead.
pieces of evidence, maybe tell a couple of stories. One is in the early days at Twitter, my understanding is that the handle you could have was limited to a certain number of characters. Maybe it was 12 or 15 characters or something like that. Um, or what you could put in your name or something like that. And that was eminently appropriate for the founding team of Twitter, who were on average Anglo-Saxon and had relatively short names. When Twitter became popular in South Asia, there literally wasn't enough characters for people to spell their names, right? So this was a bias that then they had to reflect on and change in the end. Um, the reason I bring this up is because we still have a lot of products in technology that are developed by a small amount of people, many of whom are in Silicon Valley. I do think ChatGPT is an interesting example of this, where, I mean, in Australia, we have like American vibes in some ways, but ChatGPT is polite in a peculiarly American way, which doesn't resonate so much with Australians. I've been in Germany recently, as you know. I was there when we chatted a few weeks ago, and my German friends are like, "I'm so, can it just like tell me I'm wrong and say shut up and like just get on with it and that type of stuff?" They're like, "This American politeness is just getting to my head." Um, Now, why this is relevant is I think I had a similar experience with Notebook LM when I generated a podcast about a friend's LinkedIn profile. Um, it mentioned that she had done like all her college stuff in the same city she went to school in, and how that seemed odd, but whatever. And that brought an American perspective that in America it's almost a ritual to travel somewhere else to go to college, right? And the fact she didn't do that was picked up on, and that with kind of the very American accents made it strangely like non-Australian, and she's from Australia, so it seemed perhaps I know kind of I'm doing a random walk here, But it seemed perhaps we could have more appropriate local models for people. So I actually released a podcast. I do another podcast called High Signal with a professor from Stanford at the business school who he's Chilean and he's gone back to Chile and he's like there are organizations there that perhaps they should have Chilean large language models that they work with. So I'm wondering about your thoughts on the ability for people to build their own language models or having local region specific business specific large language models, or are we going to have Sam Altman's view of one model to rule the world?
Well, you're bringing up a good point. Like people should be able to take some models and build them themselves. So an example of this is on the Gemma side, um, we just released a version of Gemma that's fine-tuned for Japanese with a bunch of Japanese folks and released it there. And then there's an active Kaggle competition right now to take a Gemma model and fine-tune it into your own into whatever I think whatever language you happen to be speaking or interested in or the community that you're trying to support. There's another one where somebody took a Gemma model in India and they fine-tuned it to be uh, they fine-tuned it specifically to one of the Indian languages. Being Indian, there's a number of languages that are in that country, and I think you hit a point in the head that it's all about enabling folks to have the tools to be able to create the experience that they need for themselves. And Gemma is like one example where that's already happened in a bunch of different ways. But this technology um, should be accessible, and I think it already is accessible to lots of folks who want to use it themselves. Now, I think the second part, which is something you and I have always faced in the data science community in general, is just because we have a lot of open source tools doesn't necessarily mean that everyone understands how to use them. And it's like the knowledge is immediately accessible. So I think there's um, still a need for like folks like you and I to go in and perform outreach in other countries or things like that, teaching them how to use even like a scikit-learn, let alone an LLM, and that continues to be need to be done. It's not enough just to like publish the technology and stuff out there, but yeah, I definitely agree. Like, uh, humanity is quite diverse, and we got to get models out there for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, even like historically, I'm a huge fan of scikit-learn,
Yeah.
clearly, but historically, wrangling like the holy trinity of scikit-learn, NumPy, and Pandas together has hasn't been, it's just like, oh, I've got my file of utility functions and all of that. I do want to jump into a demo in a minute, but I've shared in the chat, and we'll be doing a demo of Notebook LM for those currently watching. I've shared a link in the chat to your generative AI guidebook, which I love so much. I do want to talk about the page on personalized plans where you have plans, so resources to study and read for the app developer and fine tuner, those who want the fundamentals, society and security specialists, research scientists, and then the executive. So I'm just wondering if you could tell us a bit about these personas, what they need to know about AI, and why you chose to put there what you did.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks are now interested in this technology, and like you said, different folks have different questions or considerations. The executive is going to be thinking about things a lot differently than uh, the bachelor's level student that's looking to the future of their career. And there's so much happening all at once. So as I was getting questions from many folks of many walks of life of how they could get into AI, I realized the same answer doesn't work for everybody. I'm not going to tell the executive to go start PyTorch and install CUDA kernel. But I'm not going to go tell the student who's a second year sophomore to learn about organizational management and how AI can improve the efficiency of their business. Like it just doesn't make sense to
On
use
a
the
side
same
note, I wish I
resource.
didn't have to tell anyone to install a CUDA kernel, dude. I'm sorry.
I
Jokes,
I wish
jokes
I
aside.
didn't have to sell CUDA
Yeah, yeah,
kernel,
exactly, right?
but you and I have to in the line of work that we've chosen. Um, so yeah, the idea behind those personas was, I think the other challenge is now there's so much happening with Gen AI all at once that um, if you even just do a quick Google search or read the headlines of a newspaper, it's hard to understand which information you need to know, depending on who you are. So the point of the guidebook, as the name implies, is to guide people to the right resources that are available out in the internet. You could think of it like like a sort of tour map or something like that, where oh, I want to get to a certain place because I'm an executive, or I want to get to a certain place of understanding because I'm a student or an AI developer. Um, what are the set of resources? And I'm just trying to give him a quick highlight as to the key places on usually the internet, but also sometimes off the internet and actual books of what to read or what to look at if you're this type of person.
I like it. I am interested. You've made different design choices to what I'd make, and I love that. For example, in the executive section, you've told them to watch Andre Karpathy's talk, actually two talks, but one is him building GPT from scratch in code spelled out. And I would not have decided that. So what was the design choice behind getting executives to watch building GPT in code from scratch?
To be fair, I need to go update this thing. I wrote this particular one about 8 months ago, and it's in this case it's already just ancient stuff. At the time, the questions I was getting were from folks that were really curious about how these things work, and so I figured if you're an executive and you want to know exactly what's going on behind the scenes, this is the one video that really spells it out. Um, but to connect this back to an earlier conversation, I actually don't think it's worthwhile to. I don't think an executive now needs to understand how a transformer works, how attention works anymore. So I likely, actually, I'm going to now be updating the section since you called me out to removing it to a much more higher level guide. I don't. It's not important anymore to understand how the code works under the hood
And my
to that
intention
level of
wasn't to call
detail.
you out. It was to,
No. But
yeah,
it brings up something you and I've just been talking about the whole time, right? It's these this space is moving fast. What you needed to know
yeah.
maybe a year ago isn't necessarily what you need to know now.
Um, we can talk about this after, but I'd love to chat with you about this and maybe even collaborate on your Gen AI guidebook, give it like with respect to what
Oh, I would.
executives need to know and that type of stuff. That'd be super fun, man.
It would be really. Actually, I totally invite that. I'm gonna pitch you again, Hugo. Hugo is a really good author. I'm actually excited to work with you directly on writing. This would be fantastic.
I appreciate that, man. Awesome. Well, look, far out. We've been talking for like 80 minutes, man. It's felt like three. But look, we're gonna wrap up in 10 or so. So why don't we jump into a demo? I'd love to see, a tour of Notebook LM from, from the man himself and yeah, see what's up.
Yeah, let's do it. I would be happy to. Let me figure out how to share my screen.
Yep, you should have permissions.
Let's give me 2 seconds,
Yeah,
folks.
yeah. No rush. I mean,
All right, desktop two. All right, are we seeing the Hugo, your beautiful face?
oh yeah. Whoa.
All
Uh-oh.
right. So
Is this what we're doing?
let's say I want to learn more about this wonderful guy that I just met
Yo,
named
can I also
Hugo.
just say this photo in the bottom right, I don't know why I'm drawing. You see the one of me in the bottom,
This
yeah,
one?
that one.
Yeah.
I've been trying to get like I thought I don't live in Europe, but the right to deletion from Google. This was taken on a work offsite when I had food poisoning, and I hate that photo, and I hate the fact that it exists on the internet. So, anyway, why did I just draw attention to it? Who knows? But yeah, let's go on.
Uh, all right. Well, I think it's like a snapping image of yourself, if you ask me. But I can see why you would dislike
Yeah.
it now that I understand the context. Let's say I've just met Hugo, for instance, not knowing that he had food poisoning in Europe. But I want to learn more about him as a person. What we can do? Oh, this Zoom bar is getting in the way of my
This
UI.
is I
Classic.
I experience that all the time, and it's annoying to say the least. If anyone from Zoom is watching, you know, do better.
I wish you would snap
I'm kidding, but that was rude, but still do better.
user interfaces. All right. So what we can do with Notebook LM is we can go in, we can add in, let's say your website here. Um, I actually maybe I already added one of them over here, so we're just going to use that.
Okay,
Uh,
great.
One thing I'll notice is nowhere on this interface are you really is it screaming that you need to know AI or anything like that.
No.
But you just have some buttons. You can put some sources in, and you can say, you know what, I want to create a frequently asked questions about Hugo. And I click this button. We're gonna wait a little bit while some magic happens under the hood. But here we go. Within about 15 seconds or so, we get a lot about Hugo, independent data science, AI scientist, educator, and writer, podcaster, which we obviously know is true given that we're on this podcast. His experience in Bayesian data scientist, and you can see a lot of this, actually is about Hugo himself. I think
Those are questions I ask about myself every day, man.
you might as well.
Yeah.
How do you contribute? Okay, this is cool. We've got it in AI overview. I will say, we're very savvy people, and we understand that while if we're using an AI system, there may be hallucinations or
Hmm.
things like that. And can't get around that at the moment. So I can just go in here and just say, uh, uh, what college did Hugo go to? I actually have no idea what the answers to this one. I'm not pre-prepared, but we'll give it a second. Hugo did not specify. However, he does mention he spent time teaching to researchers at Yale University in New
I
Haven.
I did my postdoc there, and actually, I'm going there for Thanksgiving next week to
Oh,
hang out with my
perfect.
old friends and colleagues.
Amazing. So, okay,
Yeah.
I
I
learned that.
also I love that so this is actually really important. And we don't want this here, but when using Llama Index, for example, it will do the same. It will say the sources do not specify, which I think is very good, as opposed to trying to make up something or draw from memory as well, because Gemini knows about me, Gemma knows about me. But the fact that at least with Llama Index, it's difficult to find out what the actual prompt that was sent to the system is a challenge. But I think we don't need that here. But the fact that it says the sources do not specify is a really nice proof of principle as well.
You're exactly right, and I'm gonna bookmark that for a second. And but like let me talk about references, and we'll go back to exactly what you said. Um, I think since you're on this podcast, a lot of folks are getting a sense that Gemini is powering this whole thing, which is absolutely true. There's a Gemini model under the hood that's taking in all these sources. It could be more than one. It could be videos, audio, things like that, and it's I don't say capturing, but it's ingesting all the information that's coming from the sources themselves. Now we know obviously the generative models also have weights where they also get information from. But in the notebook case, we don't. Not that we don't want the weights to do things for us, but we're really interested in our sources, and we're not. We want Gemini to help us understand our sources, not that we want information necessarily from Gemini's weights. And so in the UI design that we were talking about earlier. For those who are AI savvy, this essentially is a RAG system. You don't have to know the word RAG. We don't put it anywhere on the screen, but it essentially is a retrieval augmented generation. And on top of it, you get links to your sources. So let's say you just want to double check that this is true. It shows me exactly where in Hugo's source, which was his website, it says that he's going to indeed be at Yale University, New Haven. And I can verify myself that this is true from a source. I don't have to trust that the LM got it right in its generation magic. That for me is huge as when I'm doing research because I need to really understand if this is 100% factually true and exactly where this is coming
And
from.
and can I also ask, did it does sorry, it gave the reference? Is that what the one is?
Exactly. So if I put, I'll let you folks do this yourself. But if I put multiple sources in, you get one, two, three, four, all the sources that you're seeing the same thing come from. So something that I do actually, sometimes I do this even with my own medical research. To be frank, is I'll put in a bunch of medical articles, and if I see that it's been cited in three or four different places, then I'm like, okay, this claim probably is true because three or four different independent sources. Gemini has found that these three independent sources have all said the same thing. Like just seeing the number of references here starts giving me uh credibility um to things. So
Can
it's
I also just quickly
yeah,
ask, so for those, most people will know what RAG is, I think, but for those who don't, it's a technical term for a version of essentially information retrieval. I personally, and I say this to too many people, sure, build a RAG system, but perhaps like benchmark with a bag of words like BM25 or something, and then use a generative response to build it as well. But my question for you is, if I wanted to build some sort of information retrieval system or RAG system like this, which gave me the specific reference. Do you have a suggestion for how to do it? Like, would I use semantic search, or I may even just use grep, dude, but or like regex matching or something. But do you have a sense of how to advise people on how to get references out when building RAG based systems?
there's I mean so there one is the in the RAG is the another like a I hope you talk about this in your application courses, like common application design patterns. I have a section on it in my Gen AI guidebook, we had mentioned agents, for instance, as being one pattern that's getting more popular. RAG, I would say, was the pattern that was in hype last year, still being used this year. So there's a lot of different solutions, just as you said. You could use traditional like TD-IDF bag of words methods, as you just said. Um, I these days tend to use embeddings a lot with my RAG
Yeah,
systems. So a quick overview. These Gen AI models are really good at giving you next token text, but there's also versions of these that tend to tell you what two things are like correlated with each other or like in the same sort of space. So you in the intermediate output. So if you pass in a recipe, some Gen AI well, I guess it's not generative in this sense, but some of these large language models in the embedding space will tell you that these recipes are more related to each other than these technical research articles versus these pieces of legislation from Australia. And it's able to put them into a subspace, and then you can use that subspace to pull out the things that are most relevant to the thing that you're typing in.
amazing. And I do want to say, I'm glad you mentioned embeddings. In, when we started doing data science at scale, people were like neural networks, neural networks, neural networks, and forgot about databases and forgot about counting and forgot
Yeah,
about group buys and that type
yeah.
of stuff. One of the things that's happens with generative AI, it's LLMs, multimodal. We've forgotten about embeddings as a
Embeddings.
culture, and they're
They're
one of the
so
most
wonderful.
important things. They form the model of relationships in which you're embedding your entire world knowledge, essentially, right? And if
They're
your
just
embeddings are crap, your model's crap.
yeah, exactly. It's just like the latent space of Bayesian models. We don't think about it, but it is like where all the power is happening. It's
I know
just
we're jumping around a bit, but I am all of this stuff would be super interesting to chat about in my course in January. I'm wondering if you'd be interested in coming and giving a short guest lecture on
I
on this type of thing.
yeah, Hugo, any opportunity I have to interact with you and the folks that you associate with, I'm all for.
Dude, that's amazing. All right, I've got a guest lecturer, as well as collaborating on Gen AI for executives for your guidebook. Great. Okay, let's jump back into the demo. Now I love we're building collaboration in real time on a podcast also.
Yeah, yeah. This is wonderful. So maybe to connect to a point you were saying earlier, Hugo and I are talking about all these crazy concepts that are below the hood, but you don't have to know any of this to the UX. You just go to this UX and all this magic between generative AI, embeddings, retrieval, all this is happening under the hood, and you're not exposed to any of it, which is actually even as a technical person is nice because I'm not trying to get into Python code all the time. Sometimes I just want to understand what's going on with Hugo's life. So this chat, let me do that. This is the chat interface of Notebook LM. The other bit, which has been the viral component in the last like 2 months, is this audio overview. So in here, if I click this one button, generate, a whole slew of magic is happening under the hood. And what's going to happen is in about 2 minutes, you're going to get these two podcast hosts talking all about Hugo and his accomplishments and what he's doing. So one thing is going to happen for sure. Hugo's going to get huge ego boost out of this, most likely about all the wonderful things that he's done, and you would get an overview of all the wonderful things Hugo has done. But I actually think a more powerful thing is happening, um, is that when I need to read a lot of sources, it does take a lot of time to sit in front of a screen and read, and like it's a very screen dependent experience, and I'm already spending so much of my life on a screen. A lot of days now, I just generate this podcast, I put on my headphones, and I just go walk in a park. And this has been a new way for me to keep up with so many things in my life, from research to trip planning. Like I have a notebook on my trip to Hawaii pretty soon. Um, it's just an easy way to then just be able to get away from a screen, but still have the information in a way that I'm able to listen to and ingest, so I can later on go make decisions about should I take this tour experience, should I take that tour experience, should I read this paper, or maybe I can just skip it. Um, and so while the UX is like really, really simple, it's literally just one button. This modern technology transforms information into another format that just makes it so much more useful for me in the way I want to consume it in my life. And to me, it's just so incredible that um, computers are just at this point, man. Like I can't imagine in the 90s knowing that my computer could just read everything and create a podcast. Like it'd be insane. Like, yeah, you can
Dude, in
tell
the 90s,
crazy
I was
excited.
playing.
Yeah.
In the early 90s, I still had floppy disks, like playing like text games in the terminal. I am interested. So all and this is just one proof of principle. Like you can create vision models and put them in here,
Yeah.
or image generation models. I do have a question in terms of these, as I mentioned before. So when I go to ChatGPT, right? My desktop app. I can talk with it. Then I can type to it, I can talk with it, I can
Mhm.
get it to generate images, and it's using GPT-4o, it's using DALL-E 3 for image generation, it's using Whisper, some version of Whisper for the speech to text, and something else for text to speech. Now, if I want to start using more state-of-the-art models, like if I want to plug in new Llama 3.2 model or Stable Diffusion or whatever it is, I need to start building my own systems. And in fact, I taught a workshop at PyData NYC 2 weeks ago about composability and building systems that incorporate essentially building your own versions of ChatGPT where you can um, incorporate all of your own different models. And I'll link to the repository in the chat, and hopefully the video will be live soon. Self-promotion aside, I am interested, like, is there a future where something like Notebook LM, I can plug in a different model, or I can use F5, for example, which is a new voice cloning. Okay, voice cloning technology is actually insane, and I'm not necessarily supporting the use of it. But if we could generate a podcast just cloning your and my voice, that would be cool. So, is there a future in which we can have tools, UX tools like this, which are no code, but if I wanted to plug in new models, I could do that as well?
You so I think there's like a future where we're gonna have both. I'm gonna go back to the cars analogy, because I think this is true of my past. Um, you can go buy a car from a Ford or a Chevy or whoever, and they've already put all the components together for you, and you just drive the car and you're done. It's very hard then in the future to then swap in a Ford um, motor into a Chevy car because they've been designed so specifically to be good at what their task is, and in that system that it's not really feasible or like practical that you would want to ever do that. And you're going to
Hmm.
see applications that are like this from everybody, even in Notebook LM. I'd say we've put a lot of work into fitting all the pieces together that the experience is seamless and this works at a super high quality level, just like if you bought a car
Makes
off
sense.
the lot. But there is still a future, like you said, where you have home kit builders where you can buy a kit car and you can put in whatever engine you want. You can put in whatever seats you want and build your own custom experience. Like that feature is also happening at the exact same time. That's like the Gemma style models and things like that.
Mm,
There's one thing though which is making this very hard for the home builder, and this I think people don't realize it because they can't see it. But it's if I wanted to build my own semi truck at home, there's like you'd have to. There's no way I could build a semi truck in my garage. The trucks are so massive. They require so much machinery. Like the engine blocks for semi trucks are so huge. You need a crane to pick them up. Like a normal person does not have this sort of machinery in a regular suburban house. Um, and some of these models are so massively big or require such big infrastructure to run that it is unlikely somebody at home is going to literally buy a data center, like a straight up data center, and run these models themselves. And that part, when you see a huge airplane like a Boeing 747, nobody reasonably goes like, I want to build a 747 at home. Like it's obvious from the size of it, it's ridiculous to do. You have to rely on a Boeing and an airport to even service this machinery.
absolutely.
So I think that's the other part that's quite hard. And I face this myself too. I'm like, can I run this myself? And I realized that actually, probably not because I cannot run a 3 million token context model on my desktop. Like it doesn't,
Yep.
this does not, there's no possible way for my GPU to handle that. Like I do need a Google level infrastructure to get that sort of context window,
Makes sense.
in this one application. So that's the other part about this, whole thing we're talking about. It's just like, um, is it what is the feasibility with the infrastructure and stuff that you have? And sometimes you just gotta let like a Google type of company or cloud vendor just do it for you.
Totally agreed. So we've got an audio, we've got a podcast now, right?
We do have a podcast. I'll try playing it. I don't know if the audio will come through, but
I'll
I
tell you
will.
if I can hear it.
Okay. We'll say this. If you can't hear it, I will download this, Hugo, and I will send you the WAV file, and you can put it in the podcast notes.
That sounds
Uh,
great.
but let's try it. Let's see if we get it. Yeah.
I can't hear it. Oh, it's because it's coming through your headphones. I think if you maybe take your headphones out and off.
I think I'm gonna break my audio thing if I do that. So I'll download it and I'll give it to you. I don't know how to pipe the audio through my audio
Okay,
interface, but
sounds good.
people can hear it. But of course, if you want to recreate this yourself, you don't even have to wait. Just take Hugo's website, go to Notebook LM, hit that button, and you'll get your own audio overview in about 5 minutes.
Amazing. Thanks so much for that wonderful demo, Raven, and chatting through all the possibilities. It's time to wrap up. I'd like to know for people who, data scientists, ML people, who want to break into working with AI models and building LLM powered systems, among other things. What's a takeaway you'd hope they'd have from this episode?
I think it's a theme that I want to highlight that you brought up a couple times in this episode. I think the knee-jerk reaction I give you is like, oh, go learn some technical thing, go read the guidebook, even go read the material in Hugo's course. But I actually want to say a different thing, which is there's just a wonderful community of people around this. Hugo is one of them, but the Pi Data community, other open source communities online, even each company has community groups. Go meet the people, go talk to people, and capture their excitement and learn from them where you should go and do things. I think it's the people that are making this technology cool and fun and worthwhile and valuable, um, not just the numbers and the math. So my encouragement: get out, join virtually, if you can, any like just like you have today. But if not, if you can, go to a meetup in a local space that you have where this AI stuff is happening in every country that I've seen. Meet some folks, shake some hands, and get to know the folks. And I think you're going to find so many more opportunities than you ever
I love
expected.
that. I
Yeah.
love that so much. Like large context windows are important, sure.
Yeah.
But versus like get there and chat with people about things. And actually, I can say something a bit personal. I was working at Yale University. I mean, a decade ago, and I was living in New York City. Don't worry, I didn't commute every day, but I did a bit too much. But at that time, 2013, 2014, I started going to meetups in New York City, and hackathons. That on South Broadway, sorry, West Broadway, there was an AWS loft which Amazon just paid for, and people would hang out there and talk shop and that type of stuff. Jared Lander was hosting incredible meetups in the R space as well, and it was being on the ground and meeting a bunch of exciting, interested, thoughtful practitioners that actually was the forcing function for me to leave academia in the end and enter this space. And funnily, I just got a message on LinkedIn from someone who's a tenured professor at a good university who's like, "There's too much exciting stuff, Hugo. I need to leave academia and go and work in this space. What would you suggest?" And one suggestion was, speak with as many people as possible. So I couldn't agree more. Raven, okay, first, thank you everyone for joining and listening and the great questions. Raven, I'd like to thank you for your, going to the frontier, doing all of this work and bringing it back to share with all of us, for your wisdom, for your expertise and generosity, but also for the several collaborations we've just decided we'll work on together
Yeah.
as well. So
Thank
that's
you,
super
Hugo.
fun. And I can't wait for all of that and can't wait to do another podcast. I'm actually thinking a series of podcasts on Bayesian thinking. I want to call it statistics. Actually, one of the best tutorials I've ever seen, which I still plagiarize from, is by Chris Fonsbeck.
Yeah.
And it is a tutorial. I don't plagiarize. I mean, of course, I reference Chris. But it's it was a tutorial he taught at PyCon, I think,
Okay.
like 2017, 2018, and it was called something like statistical thinking in Python or something along those lines. Didn't mention Bayesian at all. And I was like, why did you not mention Bayesian? He's like, because it's statistics, Hugo. And I was like, that's so great. That's so great. So I do want to have a series of episodes on generative modeling, and generative thinking, and all the wonderful probabilistic programming stuff, which I hope takes off even more soon. But in closing, thank you once again, Raven. I can't wait for our next collaboration.
Yeah, Hugo, thank you so much again for all the work that you do putting giving people like me an opportunity to come talk, but all the others you have on your various podcasts and LinkedIn posts and things like that. You're also doing incredible work building
I
this
really
community.
appreciate it, man.
Cool.
And